Classic Starts, Alice in Wonderland. Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was getting so very bored sitting with her sister on the riverbank. She had nothing to do. She was just wondering if making a daisy chain was worth the trouble of getting up to pick the daisies when she saw a rabbit in a waistcoat. "Oh, dear! I'll be late," cried the white rabbit. Alice didn't think it was strange that the rabbit was talking to himself. But she did find it odd when the rabbit took a watch out of his coat pocket. She had never seen a rabbit with a watch, much less a pocket in which to keep it. Alice was burning with curiosity. Before her sister could stop her, she ran after the white rabbit. He hopped into a large rabbit hole and she jumped in after him. And then she was falling. And falling. Down, down, down. Would the fall never end? There was nothing else to do, so Alice talked aloud to herself. "Dinah will miss me very much tonight," she said. Dinah was Alice's cat. "Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid. But you might catch a bat. And a bat is like a mouse. But do cats eat bats, I wonder?" Alice was getting sleepy. The fall was just so very long. She mumbled, "Do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats?" She couldn't answer either question, so it didn't really matter which way she said it. Suddenly, thump! She had landed on a pile of dry leaves. The fall was over. Alice was not hurt one bit. Up ahead, she saw the white rabbit hurrying down a long hallway. She ran after him, but lost him around a corner. There were doors all around her, but every single one was locked. Alice felt so sad. She had come all this way and had lost the rabbit. And, worse, now she was stuck. Then she noticed a small glass table. On top was a tiny golden key. When she turned around, she saw a little door that hadn't been there before. It was about 15 inches high. To her delight, the key fit the lock perfectly. The door opened onto a passage the size of a rat hole. Alice got on her knees to peek through. What she saw was the most lovely garden ever. She wanted to reach the colorful flowers, but not even her head could fit into the tiny doorway. It was no use. Alice went back to the little table and set the key down. Now there was a tiny bottle on the table. She was sure it hadn't been there before. On the bottle were the words "Drink me." Alice was far too wise to drink a bottle just because it told her to. She knew she should see first if it was marked poison. This bottle was not marked poison, which meant that she could drink it. And drink it she did. What a curious feeling! Alice cried. Curious indeed. Alice was shrinking. In the blink of an eye, she was only 10 inches high. Now she could go into the garden. But poor Alice. When she went to the tiny door, she found it locked again. And when she went to get the key, she discovered that she was far too small to reach it on top of the table. She sat down on the floor and cried. There's no use crying. Alice scolded herself. She liked to pretend to be two people. But there's no shot your use pretending to be two people now, she thought. There's hardly enough of me left to make one whole person. Just then her eyes fell on a little glass box under the table. It was a small cake. The words "Eat me" were written on the top in raisins. Well, I'll eat it, said Alice. If it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key. If it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. Either way, I'll get into the garden. Alice took the tiniest bite. Which way? She said to herself, and was quite surprised to find that she was still the same size. This is usually what happens when one eats cake, but Alice was by now used to strange things happening. It seemed dull for nothing to happen at all. So she took another bite. Soon she had eaten the entire cake. Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser, Alice said. She was now growing toward the ceiling. Goodbye, feet, she added. She could barely see them anymore. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and socks now. Alice kept growing. She wondered how she would get a new pair of shoes to her feet now that she could no longer reach them. They were so very far away that she decided she would have to mail them. As she thought this, her head hit the ceiling. She was more than 9 feet tall. She quickly grabbed the golden key and hurried for the garden door. Poor Alice. She was far too huge to fit through it now. All she could do was lie down and peek into the garden with one eye. Of course she began to cry again. You should be ashamed, she scolded herself. A big girl like you crying this way. It didn't help. She kept crying, shedding gallons of tears. Soon there was a large pool on the floor. It was about 4 inches deep and reached halfway down the hall. Then she heard footsteps. It was the White Rabbit. He had dressed up in a fancy suit and was carrying white gloves and a large fan. As he hurried along, he muttered, "Oh, the Duchess. She'll be awful if I keep her waiting." "If you please, sir," Alice called to him. The rabbit jumped at her voice. In fact, he was so startled, he dropped his fan and gloves and then ran away, leaving them behind. Alice picked up the fan and the white gloves. The hallway was so very hot. She started to fan her face, talking to herself as she did. How strange everything is today. I wonder if I was changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I think I remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not me, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's the puzzle. She thought about all the other children she knew. She couldn't be Ada because Ada's hair was curly. She couldn't be Mabel because she knew lots of things and Mabel knew very little. Besides, Alice said, she's she, and I'm I. Oh, how confusing. I should see if I know all the things I used to know. Let's see, 4 times 5 is 12. And 4 times 6 is 13. And 4 times 7 is, oh, dear. I'll never get to 20 that way. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris. And Paris is the capital of Rome. No, that's wrong. I must be Mabel. She tried to recite a poem she knew, but her voice sounded rough and strange in her throat. And the words came out all wrong. Alice's eyes filled with tears again. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here forever, she said. As she said this, she noticed she was wearing one of the rabbit's gloves. She must have put it on while she was talking. How did I do that? She said. The glove had been far too small. I must be shrinking again. Alice returned to the table. She guessed she was about 2 feet high. And getting smaller. She realized that it must be the fan she was using to cool herself. Alice dropped the fan in a flash. She was just in time to save herself from shrinking away to nothing. That was a narrow escape, Alice said. She was quite relieved to see that she was still there. She ran for the garden door, but it was locked again. The golden key was back on the table. Things are worse than ever, Alice thought. I've never been this small before, never. Suddenly her foot slipped and there was a splash. She was up to her chin in salt water. At first she assumed she'd fallen into the sea. Then she realized it was the pool of tears she'd cried when she was 9 feet tall. Alice swam around, looking for a way out. I shall be punished for crying so much, she said. I'll be drowned in my own tears. Something splashed nearby. At first glance, she thought it was a walrus or a hippo. Then she realized it was only a mouse. Everything was so strange down here. It wouldn't be strange at all if the mouse could talk. She spoke to it first. "Oh, mouse," she called. She thought this must be the proper way to call a mouse. "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out?" The mouse met her eyes. But he did not reply. He must not understand English, Alice thought. Maybe he's a French mouse. So she called, "Oh, est ma chat?" That was the first sentence in her French book. She forgot until she said the words that it meant, "Where's my cat?" The mouse leaped out of the water in fright. "I beg your pardon," Alice cried. "I forgot you don't like cats." "Not like cats," the mouse said in a shrill voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Dad, maybe not," Alice said. "Please don't be angry. I wish I could show you our cat, Dinah. I think you'd like cats if you saw her. She is such a sweet, quiet little thing." Alice kept talking as she swam. "She purrs and purrs. And she's so soft. And she's just terrific at catching mice, so I'm sorry." The mouse looked especially offended. "We won't talk about Dinah, if you'd rather not." "We, indeed," the mouse cried. He was trembling. "As if I would talk about them. Cats, nasty things. Don't let me hear the word again." "I won't," Alice promised. She tried to think of something else to talk about. "Are you fond of dogs?" The mouse started to swim away. "Oh, I've offended him again," Alice said. She called after him, "Mouse, please come back. We won't talk about cats. Or dogs, either." The mouse paddled back to her. His furry face had turned very pale. "Let's find the shore," he told her. "And then I will tell you the story of why I hate cats and dogs." This seemed like a good idea to Alice. The pool had become very crowded with animals that had fallen in. She saw a dodo and a lory and many other creatures. Together, everyone swam to the shore. Chapter 3: A Caucus Race. The animals gathered on the bank of the pool of tears. But they were cranky. They were soaking wet and very uncomfortable. They had a long talk about how to get dry. Alice found herself talking with them like she'd known them all her life. It seemed quite natural. At last the mouse spoke up. "Sit down, all of you. Listen. I know how to make you dry." They sat in a circle with the mouse in the middle. "Are you ready?" he called. "This is the driest thing I know." Then he began to talk about politics. He went on and on, like he was reading out loud from the most boring book. "Ugh," said the lory with a shiver. The mouse talked on and on. It was awfully dull. After a while, he paused. He turned to Alice. "How are you, my dear?" he asked. "As wet as ever," Alice said. She sighed. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all." In that case, the dodo spoke up, "The best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race." "Boo, what is a caucus race?" Alice asked. "The best way to explain it is to do it," the dodo said. The dodo marked off a race course. It was sort of a circle, he said. The exact shape didn't matter. Then Alice and the animals were told to start running wherever they wanted on the circle. They could start whenever they wanted. They could also stop whenever they wanted. Because of this, it was hard to know when the race was over. After they had been running for a half hour or so, they were dry again. The dodo called out, "The race is finished." The creatures crowded around. They were out of breath. "But who has won?" they asked. "Everybody has won," the dodo said after much thought. "And all must have prizes." "But who will give the prizes?" the creatures asked. "She will, of course," said the dodo, as if it were obvious. He pointed at Alice. The animals ran to her. They jumped up and down. Prizes! Prizes, they yelled. Alice had no idea what to do. Finally, she pulled out a box of candies from her pocket. She was lucky that the salt water had not ruined them. She handed out the candies as prizes. There was exactly one piece for everyone. Except for herself. She must have a prize, too, said the mouse. Of course, the dodo replied. What else do you have in your pocket? He asked Alice. Only a thimble, Alice said sadly. Hand it over, said the dodo. Then they all crowded around her again. The dodo presented the thimble to Alice as her prize. He gave a short speech, and everyone cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd. But they looked so serious, she didn't dare laugh. Finally, the animals sat in a circle again. You promised to tell me your story, Alice reminded the mouse. She added in a whisper, and why it is you hate C and D. Mine is a long and sad tale, said the mouse. It is a long tale, Alice said. She gazed in wonder at the mouse's tail. But why do you call it sad? She asked, puzzled. The mouse had started his story, but Alice was still thinking of his tail. You're not paying attention, the mouse snapped. What are you thinking about, I beg your pardon, Alice said politely. You had reached the middle, I think? I had not, the mouse cried angrily. A knot, Alice said. She always wanted to make herself useful. Let me help you untie it. The mouse got up and walked away. You insult me by talking such nonsense, he sniffed. I didn't mean it. Alice pleaded. Please come back and finish your story. But the mouse hurried away. What a pity, the lorry said, and sighed. I wish I had our Dinah here, Alice said. She'd soon fetch him back. And who is Dinah? Asked the lorry. Dinah's our cat, Alice said without thinking. She's so good at catching mice. And you should see her go after birds. She'll eat a bird as soon as look at it. This caused a rush of excitement among the creatures, and they ran off each in different directions. Alice was soon all alone. I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said sadly. Nobody down here seems to like her. Alice began to cry again. She was feeling very sorry for herself. Then she heard footsteps in the distance. She looked up. She hoped it might be the mouse, ready to forgive her and finish his story. Chapter 4, The Rabbit Sends in a Little Bill. It was the White Rabbit. He was hurrying through the hall, muttering, "The Duchess. Oh, my fur and whiskers. She'll be so angry. Where did I drop them?" Alice realized he must be searching for his fan and white gloves. She started to look for them, too. But they were nowhere to be seen. That's when the rabbit noticed her. "Mary Ann," he yelled. "What are you doing here? Run home and fetch me my gloves and a fan. Quickly!" Alice was so frightened, she ran off at once. She didn't even tell him her name was not Mary Ann. He thought I was his maid, she said as she ran out of the hallway. How surprised he'll be. Still, I'd better get him his fan and gloves. If I can find them. As she said this, she realized she was no longer indoors. She came upon a small road and, there, happened upon a little house. A brass plate on the door said W. Rabbit. She rushed in and hurried upstairs. How strange to be running errands for a rabbit, Alice said. I suppose I'll be running errands for Dinah next. Upstairs, she found a fan and a few pairs of gloves. She grabbed them and was just about to leave when she spotted a tiny bottle. There was no label on it that said "Drink me," but she decided to drink it anyway. I know something interesting will happen, she said. I hope I'll grow large again. I am so tired of being such a tiny little thing. It did make her grow, and fast. She had only finished half the bottle when she felt her head against the ceiling. She quickly dropped the bottle. "That's enough," she said. "I hope I don't grow more. As it is, I can't get out the door." But it was too late. She went on growing. Soon she had to kneel on the floor. In another minute, there wasn't room for her to do even that. She had to lie down with one elbow against the door. Then she had to put one arm out the window and one foot up the chimney. Finally, she stopped growing. That was good, because there was nowhere else to go. But she was also very uncomfortable. And there was no chance of her getting out of the room now. "Run, Mary," and she heard from outside the window. "Fetch me my gloves this minute." It was the White Rabbit. She trembled, forgetting she was now 1,000 times bigger than him. She had no reason to be afraid. The rabbit tried the door, but Alice's elbow was pressed against it. He couldn't get it open. "Then I'll go around and try the window," Alice heard him say. "You will not," Alice thought. When she heard the rabbit under the window, she reached out a hand and grabbed at the air. She saw a small greenhouse outside and tried not to hit it, but the rabbit must have knocked into it himself, because she heard a shriek and the crash of broken glass. "Pat!" Alice heard the rabbit cry. "Tell me, what's that in the window?" Another voice Alice assumed it was Pat's answered. "It's an arm, Your Honor." "It's got no business there," the rabbit yelled. "Take it away!" Alice spread her fingers and grabbed at the air again. This time, there were 2 little shrieks. And more sounds of broken glass. She heard something being wheeled over. There were now many voices talking. "Where's the other ladder?" "Bill's got it." "Bill, bring it here." "Put them in this corner." "No, tie them together first." "They don't reach high enough." "They'll do just fine." "Bill, catch hold of this rope." "Mind that loose shingle." "Oh, it's coming down." "Look out below." A loud crash. "Bill, look what you did." "Who will go down the chimney?" "Bill, of course." "Bill, the master says you've got to go down the chimney." "So Bill's going down the chimney, is he?" Alice said. "They make Bill do everything." Alice had her foot in the fireplace. She waited until she heard scratching in the chimney, then gave a little kick. "There goes Bill," she heard the voices say. There was some scrambling to catch him. The rabbit shouted, "Burn the house down." Now Alice had had enough. She called as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dinah on you." Dead silence. Alice waited to see what they'd do next. A shower of pebbles came through the window. Some hit her in the face. But when the pebbles fell to the floor, they turned into little cakes. "If I eat one, it's sure to change my size," she thought. "It couldn't possibly make me larger, so it must make me smaller." Alice swallowed a cake. She was thrilled to find herself shrinking. When she was small enough to fit through the door, she ran outside. There she saw a crowd of animals. In the middle of the crowd, a lizard was being bandaged up by 2 guinea pigs. Alice wondered if the lizard was poor Bill, the animal she had kicked out of the chimney. Everyone else rushed at Alice. But she ran madly away into the woods. "The first thing I've got to do," Alice said as she wandered the woods, "is grow to my right size. Then I need to find that lovely garden." It was an excellent plan. The only thing was, she had no idea how to do it. "I suppose I should eat or drink something," Alice said. "But what?" She looked around. There were flowers and trees and grass. But there was nothing obvious to eat or drink. There was a large mushroom growing near her. It was about her height. She looked under it and on both sides of it and behind it. Then she decided she may as well look on top of it. She stood on tiptoe and peeked over the edge of the mushroom. Her eyes met those of a giant blue caterpillar. Chapter 5, Advice from a Caterpillarer. The caterpillar gazed at Alice for quite some time in silence. At last he spoke in a slow, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" he asked. I hardly know, sir," Alice found herself saying. "I knew who I was this morning. But I think changed several times since then." "Explain yourself," the caterpillar snapped. "I can't explain myself, sir," Alice said sadly. "Because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "Being so many different sizes in one day is very confusing," Alice said. "It isn't," the caterpillar said. "Maybe you don't think so now," Alice said. "But when you turn into a butterfly one day, I think you'll feel a bit strange. Don't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe you'd feel no different," Alice said. "All I know is, it feels very strange to me." "You," said the caterpillar. "Who are you?" Which brought them back to the beginning. Alice was getting annoyed. "I think you should tell me who you are first," she said. "Why?" This was a puzzling question. Since Alice could not think of a good reason, and since the caterpillar seemed so grumpy, she turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar said. "I have something important to say." This sounded promising. Alice returned to the mushroom to hear it. "Keep your temper," the caterpillar said. "Is that all?" Alice said. "No." The caterpillar was silent for a long while. At last he said, "What size do you want to be?" She thought a moment. "A little larger," she said. 3 inches is a wretched height to be." "It is a very good height," the caterpillar shouted. He stretched himself out to his full length. He was exactly 3 inches tall. "But I'm not used to it," Alice cried. "You'll get used to it," the caterpillar said. Finally, he yawned and shook himself. Then he got off the mushroom and crawled away. He called out, "One side will make you grow taller. The other side will make you grow shorter." "One side of what?" Alice thought. "The other side of what?" "Of the mushroom," the caterpillar said, as if she'd said it out loud. He crawled out of sight. Or Alice looked at the mushroom. She tried to decide which side was which. The mushroom was perfectly round, so it was hard to tell. At last, she stretched her arms around as far as they would go. She broke off a bit of the mushroom in each hand. She nibbled a little from her right hand. The next moment she felt a hard smack under her chin. Her chin had struck her foot. Frightened, she tried to nibble some from her left hand. Her chin was so close to her foot, there was hardly room to open her mouth. She was able to squeeze in just one bite. She began to grow. "My head's free at last," she cried. When she looked down, all she could see was a long length of neck. It rose like a stalk from a sea of green leaves below. "What can that green stuff be?" Alice said. "And where have my shoulders gone? And oh, my poor hands. How is it I can't see you?" There seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head, so she tried to get her head down to her hands. Alice was delighted to find that her neck could bend easily in any direction, like a snake. She zigzagged her head through the trees. Finally, she found her hands. She set to work carefully nibbling one piece of the mushroom and then the other. She grew sometimes taller and sometimes shorter. At last, she brought herself down to her usual height. With this done, she set off to find the flower garden. Suddenly she spied a house in the distance. The house was very small. She didn't want to scare whoever lived inside, so she ate another bit of the mushroom. She did not go near the house until she was 9 inches tall. Chapter 6, Pig and Pepper.